All right, guys, I just want to welcome back to the Gridiron Gurus podcast. Today, me and Nick here are going to be doing a 7 round Las Vegas Raiders mock draft about less than 2 weeks out from draft night. So, we're going to be doing a lot of these 7 rounders on the channel throughout the upcoming days. Getting things started, the Raiders, they only have 3 picks in the first 3 rounds as of right now. Obvious choice at number 1 in quarterback Fernando Mendoza. And then after that, I think they're going to go load up on defense. Now, this is a team that has a lot of team needs, of course. They need a lot of help in a lot of different areas. They had a lot of money to spend, though, in free agency, and they put it to good use. They went out there, they signed a new starting center, Tyler Linderbaum, to a big deal, signed 2 linebackers as well, cleared that need instantly. I think the pass rush still remains something that's probably going to be off this list because they did end up keeping Max Crosby as of right now, and they also signed Quiddy Pay. So the team needs became a lot more clear for this team, which made this 7 rounder a little bit easier. And getting things started, Peter Woods, defensive tackle. This is a team that had Christian Wilkins at one point. He ended up getting cut very quickly into his tenure with them. And they still need a game changer in the middle here. I think this pass rush has nice upside. The aforementioned Crosby, Tyree Wilson, a former first round pick. They need physicality. They need run stopping prowess. Peter Woods in a stacked defensive tackle class seemingly keeps falling in mock drafts. So I think he'll be available here in the top 40. Elite athlete, 6'3", 310, really impressive explosiveness. The agility really stands out. Very sound technique and violent hands. He's been a great run defender in his career. Length is about average. Production can be inconsistent. And, we're not sure what kind of anchor he can be overall, but I think Peter Woods is a player of a lot of upside. And then I think they'll also add a safety in Kamari Ramsey. Great read and react player, impressive eyes in zone matched with instincts. Good athlete with fast back pedal. He's a willing run defender as well. Definitely needs to clean up his tackling technique. The lateral burst can make him a liability maybe in man coverage, and sometimes he can really struggle to jump routes when he gets stacked up. Plenty of positives and negatives to go around, but I think these are good football players that help with some needs, Nick. When it comes to deep rebuilds, you have to make picks that aren't exactly going to be flashy, right? Taking a safety in the 3rd round when your football team can barely win a football game is not something that's really going to cheer up the fan base, but this is how you build a football team through the draft, positions of value, where they need help. I think this makes a lot of sense to go D tackle and safety for this football team.
There's no hiding that this is a deep rebuild in Sin City. It's going to take a while for the Raiders to dig themselves out of this hole, and I think it starts immediately with Fernando Mendoza at 1-1. I'll go 20 seconds on this. I tried to nitpick something wrong with him. It's impossible to do. 3 of his 6 interceptions this year I didn't think were great. The one against Penn State was really not that ideal. There was another one, against Maryland that wasn't that great, and obviously the one against Oregon in the first matchup in Eugene was pretty bad. That was not a very good read at all. But outside of that, I'm just nitpicking here. This kid is an absolute gamer, a fighter. He's going to go out there and win you football games. You saw that this past year. He earned the Heisman Trophy. He is one of one for a reason, and I look forward to seeing him get drafted with his family in Miami during the NFL draft. I'm really excited to see what that looks like. That's a slam dunk pick. I think Peter Woods could be a phenomenal pick for this team as well. Woods was a highly rated recruit, out of high school from the state of Alabama going to Clemson, and he had some really good moments at Clemson. Didn't quite live up to the expectations, I think, but he is a guy that's really good against the run. He's really good in that B gap, and he can really do a lot for your team. I think he is a lot better in run defense that people give him credit for. Played about 200 snaps in run defense last year, 360 in pass rush, and I thought he was really solid across 560 snaps. Had 3 sacks, 2 hits, 9 QB hurries. He had double-digit QB hurries in 24 and 25, 3 sacks in 2024 as well. Would like to see a little bit more production out of him, but I think he's a player that can do a lot at 6'3", 310. He can really do a lot. Really good strength, athleticism. The size is really good, and he's versatile. I think you can move around and get a lot out of Peter Woods, who could be a really big asset for a defensive unit. I think when you plug him on this defensive line, that's going to need some help. They're going to need to find a way to put pressure on the quarterback and certainly find a way to clog the run. I think Peter Woods is a lot better run defender, and I think he can be really good in run defense for the Raiders. I look at Kamari Ramsey. I think this is a player that's really solid at safety, who can really be moved around. Can play in the box, can play slot, was probably a little bit better at slot, but can definitely play in the box if need be. And I think he had some solid reps last year, had about 480 snaps for USC, 20 tackles, only had 1 missed tackle in those bunch. He was pretty solid in coverage, was pretty good the year before that as well. He had 15 missed tackles in 2024. He cut down on that number significantly in 2025. I know he played a couple less games, but still, he cleaned up his play a lot. He was really definitely a little bit more accurate as a tackler, was better against the run, kind of had that better football IQ, good versatility. I think he can move around a lot and can do a lot. Definitely the size at 6 foot, 205 maybe is a little bit concerning, and the athleticism might be a bit lacking with Ramsey. But I think this is a team that needs talent. This is a guy that can get after the ball. He can be really solid in defense and do a lot for your team. I think he's a clean tackler with a high football IQ. It would be a pretty solid pick at 67. It would fill a need because this defense needs a ton of help.
Now I move to the next slide here. The Raiders do have 7 selections on day 3, which of course they could use these to trade back up into the first or second round, or the first or second day, that is. But I think this team needs to keep these selections and use them. There's definitely going to be some good football players available in the fourth round, or they have 3 selections. I have them getting things started here with a pair of Texas A&M Aggies. Will Lee at quarter. This is the team that got good play out of Eric Stokes last year. Other than that, though, this cornerback room, it needs improvement, it needs help, right? And Lee, a good man coverage corner, has size and speed, matched with some pretty good length, excels at mirroring opposing receivers' routes, has good closing speed as well, limits yards after catch. I think, poor eyes in zone or something he struggles with. He can definitely struggle to carry vertically at times when he's too handsy. And then poor angles on the run game, all things we can clean up, right? So I think Will Lee's definitely a high upside player. It was really impressive for A&M for a couple of seasons. Demetrius Crownover, he was the story in Mobile, 6'7", 336, was a bookend right tackle for the Aggies. This guy shined, though, in the offseason workouts. Obviously, the massive frame and length is something of note. He can absorb contact and be a strong anchor. Plenty of experience versus top-tier comp. Footwork and hand usage has improved as well. The overall placement of his hands is still a work in progress, and it's hard for him to garner leverage at his size, especially when the lateral quickness is lacking. Now, I think this is a team that they're still going to give DJ Glaze a shot at right tackle. He's still a young player. Didn't play well as a rookie, but that's all right. Colt Miller over at left tackle is going to come back from injury, and he's going to be a standout player for them. And I think this offensive line, Nick, is not as big as of a concern as it was coming into the offseason. The aforementioned Linderbaum, Spencer Burford they picked up in free agency, Jackson Powers Johnson's going to slide over to guard full time. So I think that they just need to focus on a right tackle and adding depth to this offensive line, but it's not the biggest concern in the world for me going into this upcoming season for Clint Kubiak.
No, I don't think the offensive line is that bad at all. I think Crownover, in the fourth round would be a really solid add for this team. Played, fully at right tackle last year. Had 2 snaps randomly at left guard, kind of interesting. But he's a tackle, right? He plays right tackle, really solid. He was good, a good balance between pass block and run block. Played about 780 snaps last year. Gave up 2 sacks, 2 hits during that. He was pretty solid, right? Obviously, the frame on him is insane at 6'7", 330. He's huge, right? And I think he could be really solid at tackle. This is an offensive line that I like what they did this offseason. They added a lot of key pieces. They were able to do a lot of different things. I think it was good here. So I'm not as concerned with the offensive line. But taking a flyer on him in the fourth round, I think makes a lot of sense. And then earlier in that round, they take another Aggie in Will Lee. I think Will Lee's got great speed, right? I think he closes really well. I think he's a really solid tackler. I think he's really good overall. He was solid last year for A&M, right? About 300, 700 plus snaps, about 400 of those in coverage. Gave up 32 receptions on 58 targets. He was pretty solid, right? I think he was a good player. They move him around a little bit at times. Pretty solid corner. I think he's really good at man. I think he's really solid. Can stick to his offensive player. Play really solid defense. I certainly would like to see him be a little more aggressive. Maybe find a way to kind of get that interception number up. He had 0 last year. Had 2 the year prior to that. But I think he's a solid player that could really do a lot for this secondary. And I think this is, again, the secondary is not the biggest need in the world here, but I think this is a player that you add that's really solid and could do a lot for that defense. I like these two A&M players here heading out west to Vegas. I think certainly they add 2 pieces of depth to positions that are very key on their team that the Vegas Raiders went after and fixed in the offseason, but they add some depth, they add some talent across the board. 2 guys, Texas A&M, that could fit well here.
And now you look at this receiving room, right? They definitely need help because they don't really have any alphas outside of Brock Bowers at tight end, of course. In terms of pure wide receivers, they have young upside, though. Jack Besh, Trey Tucker has a lot of speed, as does Dante Thornton. Jalen Naylor was always a good third option for the Vikings. We'll see what he can do as maybe one of their primary targets, but I still think they need to add a receiver or two. They don't need to be that aggressive in doing so, though. I think they can wait till day 3. Caleb Douglas, I think, would make a lot of sense because I just talked about how they have a lot of guys who are undersized with speed, and Douglas, he's a great outside pass catcher. 6'4", 205, strong athletic player, has good focus. I love the catch radius. I think that size really is impressive, and that's why he's such a standout player in contested catch situations. It doesn't limit his movements either. He's still quite fluid, great red zone target. He can play the slot if you need him to. Overall play strength maybe is something that's a concern. The top end speed is average, but I think this is a great complementary player, Nick. We have speed, plenty of it already in this receiving room. add a guy that can make plays out wide, and I'd be a big fan of this. I truly hope Caleb Douglas ends up a Raider for Mendoza in this offense.
I think Douglas would be a phenomenal player to add. He was pretty good last year for Texas Tech. He had 54 receptions, 850 yards, seven touchdowns, about 16 yards for grab. I think he's got some solid hands, some good footwork. I think he is a great project receiver at the X position here, right? I think the speed is a bit concerning, but the hands, he can work on that. It wasn't as bad as it was. I think he can add some strength. 6'4", about 205 pounds, so he can certainly take a hit here. He'll be really good on the outside. I think he'll be a really good player that could do a lot in the X position here. They can add a lot of depth. This is a position where they got to add some guys here. I like the speed they have already. I think they have some solid pieces in the slot. But overall, I think they can add a receiver in Douglas that can do a lot for this team. I like the size on him. I think he could be really solid for this team, immediately make a big impact. And at 134, I don't really hate the pick at all. I think it's really solid. A bit, of an interesting spot for him, but overall, I think this is a guy that could do a lot late in that fourth round. He's a very talented player that could plug in and be competitive on a team that needs some receiving help immediately for their young quarterback they should be selecting early on.
I think Zane Durant makes a lot of sense as well. This is a guy that ran a blazing 4.75 40-yard dash. Good short area burst. Has the versatility. High intensity pass rusher, though, is what I like most about him. And if you already have a strong motor and you're already a hard worker matched with Max Crosby, who's probably going to be pushing you in practice because everyone knows he's got the most insane motor probably in NFL history, right? That means that this player might come out there and just put on a tear. So I think it makes a lot of sense to pair him up with this defensive line group, and I think he's a high upside player you can get in the fifth round.
Very high upside player. I love the speed on Zane Durant. He's a very physically fast player that gets after the quarterback and puts a ton of speed. 4 sacks last year for Penn State, had 14 QB hurries, double digit of those in all 3 years as a high level starter for Penn State. Played 476 snaps last year. Good balance between pass rush and run defense. Definitely think his pass rush is more impressive than his run defense, but he's really solid in the B gap. I like what he can do with that frame and that speed. About 6'1", 290 pounds. He's really solid speed. I think the footwork is really good. The hands are solid as well. I think he needs to develop some pass rush success at times to complement some of that speed and was able to do, but he has elite strength. If he can get the consistency right, he could be phenomenal in run defense and pass defense. And taking him in the fifth round, I think makes a ton of sense for a team that could just kind of use a little bit more beef, work on the defensive line with some solid players already. That could work out very well for this team.
Moving to the final three selections of this mock draft, Quintavious Hutchins at defensive end, probably the least favorite one I had in this mock. He's a good run defender, but overall limited athlete, lack of pass rush production as well. How good of a football player is he truly? I'm not even sure if it's worthy of being drafted at all. But I think it makes sense. They need depth, so maybe they can give him, maybe they can get some good play out of him. Damani Jackson, another cornerback, I think would make a lot of sense at some point in this draft. This is a player me and Nick have been highly critical of really throughout his entire career, a former 5-star who seemed to just be a giant liability for what was a very good Alabama defense. But at times he can make good plays in coverage. His technique has improved against the run. And even though overall he still isn't that good of a player, I don't feel like it's a player that I think is worthy of a day three selection that you can get some good play out of. And then Tyron Montgomery. Now, the biggest problem with him is he did play at D3. 6'1", 185, quite thin. Older player as well. He's like 24 years old. So there's a lot of negatives here working against him, but he does have ball skills, nice catch radius. Nice route running in the short area. Impressive yak, and he played well against D1 football players at the Senior Bowl, Nick. So this is a guy that I think deserves an opportunity, and it makes a lot of sense for the Raiders to go after him as they might have a diamond in the rough here.
Three interesting pieces here. Hutchins, when you look at him, he was okay at times at Boston College. I thought he was solid at outside tackle where he played pretty much the entirety of his time, split pass defense, and run defense snaps. Had 2 sacks, 7 hits, 16 hurries last year on 400 snaps of work. Definitely need to see a little bit more out of him, but I think he's an interesting project player at 6'3", 240. He's ranked, 192nd on a lot of boards, 190, 195. So I think he's sort of in this late sixth round, middle sixth round range where I think he could be solid if you bring him in. And again, this is sort of a depth piece here. Damani Jackson certainly got a lot of bad looks from me throughout the season. I was not happy with a lot of his performance. He made some really boneheaded plays at Alabama, but still a very talented player. I think he could certainly do a lot. He had 300, coverage snaps last year and only gave up 16 receptions, 1 touchdown. So, those are decent stats. Only did have 21 targets, but still ended up the year prior to that having 27 receptions on 50 targets, still only 1 touchdown in that season as well. So he was pretty good in the red zone. I think he was solid as a corner, pretty good overall matching up. I think, about 500 snaps last year for Alabama. And there were certainly some questionable things, but overall, he didn't have the worst season in the world. And again, I think taking him in the sixth round, you could do something with him. I think he's got the football IQ. He's got some solid frame to work with. just questionable if he can kind of round out the fundamentals and get everything working. Montgomery is a very interesting one here. Taking him in the seventh round, interesting to kind of throw him in. Played at John Carroll in the lower levels. He was great for them last year, though, right? Had 120 receptions for 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns. And that is a ton of targets at 145 targets, but 15 touchdowns. He was in the red zone early and often for that John Carroll team, and he was good at the Senior Bowl. He was able to kind of compete with some of the bigger dogs and play some really good performances there and look solid. And taking him in the seventh round, I don't necessarily hate it as a guy. Taking a flyer on a guy who's got some experience at lower level football and was able to hang with some of the tougher players. Taking around 7, might as well see what you can do with it. This is an interesting prospect who has some potential to be a guy that could be hanging around the NFL, could be a good special teamers, could add some impact later on in the NFL draft.
Let's wrap things up for today's episode. I think this is overall a pretty solid mock for the Raiders. A lot of variety here and a lot of players that can make an impact. I think there's at least 4 to 6 guys here I think can be long-term starters for this football team. It'll be exciting to see what happens, Nick. Rebuilds are always something to monitor, not just when you're playing the video game, but in real life as well, right? Even if you're not a fan of the team. So I'm very interested to see what Vegas does. And I hope that this team can continue the build because I think, with the pieces they have at the receiving group, with this new quarterback coming in and Brock Bowers, of course, they could really and Clint Kubiak, of course, they could really ascend. And of course, Ashton Janty's there as well. So this is an offense, Nick, that could all of a sudden, I think, find themselves in a couple years a top 5 unit in the league, and I'm rooting for them.
Yeah, I thought the Kubiak hire was great. I think this is a team that could really jumpstart a rebuild pretty quickly with a good draft. I think they'll have a great quarterback. They have a great running back in Janty. They have a phenomenal tight end and weapon in Brock Bowers. Got to add some depth on the defensive side of the football. Definitely got to add some pass catchers, which we addressed in this mock draft. I like what we turned out here. I think this is a pretty solid mock draft overall. I think if they get Peter Woods, that'd be a great player to get in the second round. I think they can add some depth here, add some key pieces that could be big impacts for the Raiders. The future looks bright in Las Vegas. I think you kind of kickstart your rebuild here with a pretty good draft.
But for this episode, make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.